This is the story of how I got the idea for and how I started making my first game, LORD TEMIN'S FORTRESS, which is available on Steam. I actually started this game at the age of 47, which is pretty late in life to decide I'm going to be a computer games developer. It took me over 2 years to make the game and finally get it on Steam. And this is pretty much what happened. I was out in China and I was a teacher. Sometimes I was given the option to teach whatever subject I liked to classrooms full of teenagers. The one subject that I always had in common with them was computer games. I've always loved playing computer games. I think they're fantastic. And I'd give a breakdown of the full history up until the modern big release games we get now, like GTA 5 and Call of Duty, etc. One of the students, after one of the lessons, he said to me, "You really seem to come alive when you talk about computer games. You really seem very excited by the whole subject." I said, "Well, yes, I've always been excited by this subject." He said, "So why didn't this become your career? Why didn't you make computer games?" He said, "Maybe something went wrong in your life somewhere." And this really got me thinking, and it caused me to think back to when I was a kid. And when I was about 16, I subscribed to, it was called Input magazine, and it basically taught you how to program 8-bit BASIC. And I learned on the Commodore 64. I spent a few months going through very simple programs, 10 print, hello world, 20, go to 10. You type run and it fills the screen. Very simple stuff. But as I was learning this, I was always overambitious. I had this idea, maybe I could make a text-based game. So, during the summer holiday, when I was 16, I wrote 2 text adventures. Basically where you read a page of text and you can press 1, 2 or 3 on the keyboard to select a decision about what you want to do as the character in the game. Very much like the fighting fantasy books, which were popular at the time, and the choose-your-own-adventure books. You read text, and you make decisions, and the story unfolds. They weren't very exciting titles. One was called House, and the other one was called Treasure. The adults that I showed this to, they were very impressed. So, "Oh, well, you've got some ability here, you can program a computer." My friends, on the other hand, were not impressed. Boring, isn't it? Reading off a screen, who wants to do that? I was like, you're probably right. No graphics. So I got hold of the shoot-'em-up construction kit. Shooting games, So I thought, anyway, I'll make my first shooting game. I learned roughly how to use this construction kit, and I made a vertical scrolling game called Silo Escape. And it was basically, you have a spaceship, and eyeballs drop down from the top, and you shoot them, and they explode. And rockets rise up from underneath you, and you have to dodge them. Very silly game. And my friends nearly fell off their chairs laughing at it, and I realised, I've got to do something cool. I really wanted to prove a point that, I wasn't just a joke here. So I made another game, again a shooting game, and this one was called Beverly Hills Raid. It was basically roads with mansions, top down, and palm trees. And it did look pretty good. Graphics were quite nice. And you drive a sports car and basically shoot police cars and they explode. Quite immature, quite silly, but fun, and it did look good. And my friends didn't laugh at that. They were, well, that's pretty good, that's pretty good. It looked like a very early GTA 1. This was in 1988, which is 10 years before GTA. Anyway, the end of the holidays came, and my father said to me, "All right, playtime's over now, back to studies." Okay, so back in the 80s, computer games were a fun thing, and we had no idea that they were going to become the massive industry they are today. They were just a fun distraction, playtime, as my father thought. So, didn't really give it much thought, and it didn't really seem like I could ever have a job doing something in computer games. It just didn't even seem possible. So off I went to college and did all the normal stuff. And about 5 years after that, I had a Commodore Amiga, and I wanted to program my first RPG. It was sort of like, if anybody knows these games, Eye of the Beholder, Lands of Lore, where you can basically look in the 4 compass directions and move from square to square around a 3D looking maze of sorts. A dungeon maze. I got a big thick manual and I got some software called Amos Basic. Spent a long time learning it. Unfortunately, the software used so much memory, I needed to get a memory expansion. And even with the memory expansion, I didn't really know much about memory optimization. I could not make anything other than just the basic maze to wander around without adding anything, without adding any other graphics for characters or enemies in the maze or anything like that. So it was just a big empty maze to wander around, which looked nice. It had an open top with the stars and, cobbled roads and stuff, nice and colourful, burning torches at the intervals. But I couldn't finish it. So I just thought, oh, this is not for me. And I just left computer game development completely after that. I studied some HTML a number of years later and to make web pages, which was quickly replaced by Front Page Express and other programs, web pages and that kind of stuff. I left that behind and got into 3D graphics with Blender, which I did for a number of years, and that became sort of like a hobby. I was making a living doing Photoshop work at one point. Anyway, cut back to the timeline, when one of my students in China said to me, something went wrong with your life. You could have been making computer games. I kind of thought, well, maybe I still can. I was 47 years old at the time, and I was thinking, can I make a computer game by myself? Got myself a very good Alienware computer, RTX graphics card, fast processor, and I thought, why don't I just really do my best here? Really just try to make a good game. And I was pretty good with 3D graphics by that point, and I'd had experience making my own music using FL Studio. So I thought, maybe I can do this, yeah? So I sat down. I looked, first of all, at the Blender game engine, which is built into Blender, one of the, the earlier builds of Blender, before it went 2.8 and they dropped the engine completely. And I made a version of my game which looked well, but it didn't play very well. The engine was just far too limited, and I thought, I'm going to have to learn an engine, and I'm probably going to have to learn to program all over again in a completely new language. It's probably moved on massively since those days of the 8 and 16-bit BASIC. But I thought, let's have a look. And I spent at least 3 weeks just looking at alternatives like Unity, Unreal, CryEngine, Coppercube, Armory 3D, the Up Blender game engine, and then finally I came over Godot. I thought, Godot, what's this? And there were a few tutorials, mostly for 2D type games, and I thought, maybe I can have a look at this. And it probably took me another 3 weeks just to get used to the navigation of this program. It looked good and everything seemed to be very well organized, but I had nobody to help me. I was in China, I didn't have a VPN, so I couldn't access YouTube. All the websites I wanted to use were pretty much blocked. I was very much out on my own. Plus, my PC, which I bought in China, had Windows, very helpfully, in Chinese. Talk about having the odds stacked against you. But I didn't want to give up, and Godot was only a small download, which took forever at the connection speed I had, and I managed to download it, and it took me a while just to even learn the interface, and after a while, I'd say after 2 months, I finally had a first person running around a flat plane and bumping into walls. Right, but I had a lot of the assets that I built, the 3D assets, pre-built. Then I had trouble importing them and getting those to work in Godot because I didn't know what I was doing. It is actually very easy once you know, but if you don't know, like I didn't, and with no one to help you, it was a hard slog. Every step of the way was difficult, but I did manage to learn GDScript, which is similar to Python. Just by doing everything the hard way, push, 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 I managed to slowly build up a game, just based on the principles of things I liked. I like castles at night time in the rain. I always thought dark, stormy, rainy nights and castles were cool. And my cousin suggested, he said, why don't you start with something simple, like a puzzle game? So I thought, all right, I'll make a puzzle game. Without realising it's actually one of the hardest things, because I can rig and skin characters in 3D. I could have probably done a third-person game with reasonable animation and reasonable characters, and it'd be a shooting or fighting game, and that would have been a lot easier. But I struggled, I persevered, I made this puzzle game, which gradually got bigger and bigger, and more ambitious, and looked better and sounded better, and often having to rewrite the code from start to finish over and over again, because sometimes it was so bug-ridden I couldn't debug it. It was like a hairball I couldn't untangle, and sometimes I just had to start from scratch again. But I became more and more organised with each iteration. So with this repetitive approach of just going over and over again, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, the insane definition of insanity. Doing something over and over again is basically the definition of practice and persistence and sales. Anyway, separate rant. I did just persist, and I had hurdles that I thought could not be overcome. Like when it came to exporting the game, you need to download the export file separately. Couldn't do that in China. The connection speed was too slow. It just kept cutting off. I thought, what am I going to do? I thought, I can't finish this game. There's just technically no way I can do it whilst in China. And then it got released on Steam. So I was able to download Godot with the export files with a fast download connection, and I was able to at least get a first finished version of the game. I got my stepson playtesting it for me, and it just kept going step by step. And some of the harder things to program, like game saves and checkpoints, I just had to learn the hard way. And I'm sure if a programmer looked at my code, he'd probably just laugh out loud at it. But I finally got an end result, and that's basically the story of how Lord Temin'S Fortress came to be. Just by improving everything step by step and just persisting, just trying to solve problems one by one, always focusing on just what's in front of me. And sometimes I ran up against things I just couldn't do, so I ignored them for the time being and went and worked on something I could do, and then went back to it later. And I won't lie to you, there were moments when I thought, this is just never going to work. There are bugs there you feel you just can't find. You don't want to start from scratch again, but I had to several times, learning it every step of the way. And I was passionate about the game, about the end product. I finally got there. So the moral of this long-winded story is, if you have a passion to do something, then you'll find a way to do it somehow, if you just keep pushing at it. I found getting the game on Steam almost as hard as making the game, because I'm just terrible at that kind of thing, and so impatient when it comes to navigating complicated websites with loads of terminology I have no idea what a lot of it means, builds and depots. I just never come across this stuff at all. It was like a foreign language. It was like my computer in Chinese. But I finally got there. 2 years and 2 months after the idea, I finally had a finished game, and I finally got it on Steam. And there I was, ready to press the release app, and it was at that point I thought, yeah, I've done it. I finally got there. So it's Lord Temin'S Fortress on Steam. Please check it out and let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you.